And today we're going to have a little look at CLIL teacher competencies, and in particular, what do good CLIL teachers do? That's the question I'm hoping that by the end of the webinar we'll be able to answer. That's the objective for today. Okay, so we might come back to that one at the end and see if we've got a better idea. Before we start looking at the details, I want you to just have a look at this question on this slide here. What would you expect to see in a good CLIL lesson? In a word or a word or two, type into the chat, what would you expect to see happening in a good CLIL lesson? Type your answers in the chat, have a little think. See if you can summarise it in a word. Yes, very good. Engage students, enthusiasm, interest, action, communication, motivation, knowledge, hands-on learning. Oh, you're typing so fast I can't keep up with you. Project, laugh, very good, I like that one. Creativity, curiosity, communication and motivation. Okay, so we've got some very similar ideas. I think probably you're all very good CLIL teachers already. So Mrs. Smith was a teacher who taught in Britain. She wasn't a CLIL teacher, she was teaching in a British school in the late 1960s, early 1970s, I think it was. And I'm going to read you the story of Mrs. Smith, which I have here. Rather than put it on a slide, I thought it might be more interesting in a webinar for you to listen to it. So I'm going to tell you very briefly the story behind Mrs. Smith. What I want you to do is to listen to what I'm telling you about Mrs. Smith, and then I'm going to ask you a question at the end, and to answer the question I want you to type your ideas into the chat like we did with the previous question. Okay, so Mrs. Smith. Several years ago, a school inspector had been called to investigate a school in London, and it was actually in an area of London that was quite a difficult area to work in for teachers. It was in Brixton. In the school, many of the students were playing truant. So when the inspector went into the school, she realised that the school had a high number of learners who didn't speak English as their first language. These were the ones who were missing class on a regular basis. But, strangely, there were certain classes that all of the learners did attend without fail. And the inspector made further inquiries and realised that these classes were taught by one teacher, who we're going to call Mrs. Smith. The inspector decided to go and observe Mrs. Smith's classes to see why the learners were attending her classes and not attending the other teachers' classes. Okay? When the inspector went to see the class, what kind of things do you think the inspector saw? Posters on the wall, motivating activities, slowly, I can't read that quick. Happy children, games, participation, active and happy students, sweets, okay, lots of colour. Mrs. Smith was teaching a lot of kids whose first language wasn't English. So without the word CLIL or the acronym CLIL ever having been invented, she was teaching as a good CLIL teacher. That's why the students wanted to go to her classes. Okay, that's what it was. So in terms of input, she gave clear instructions on how to complete the class task, so the kids understood what was expected from them. Thank you all for coming and listening and participating.